Welcome everyone on the latest video on learning SQL. Today's topic is going to be subqueries. Okay, let's get started, shall we? So before we get right into doing examples, the first thing we have to do is figure out what a subquery is, get the syntax, and see some rules. A subquery is just a query inside another query. Okay, so we nest our queries or select statements or whatever we're doing together. Some of the rules we have to follow are subqueries are always enclosed within parentheses. In other words, we put the round brackets around our subqueries. A subquery can only have one column in the select clause unless multiple columns are in the main query or outer query for the subquery to compare its selected columns. You'll see that in our example. I'll point this out specifically what this statement means. An order by clause, don't put in a subquery. It won't work. You can use the order by clause in the outer query, no problem. Subqueries that return more than one row, in other words, when you run a select statement and more than one value comes back, you need some kind of operator that can handle multiple values. The one that I showed you in previous videos was the in operator. That's like synonymous with putting ORs, Boolean ORs between all the values that come back. You could use the in, the any, or the all operator to handle multiple values. So when you don't know how many values could come back, you have to use one of these multi-value operators like in, all, or any. In is the most popular. A select list cannot include references to values that evaluate to a blob array, club, or n-club. In other words, we have to return discrete values. We can't return video files or audio files. Like we don't do anything with that. A subquery cannot be immediately enclosed in a set function. A set function is another name for aggregate. Yes, I spelled aggregate wrong there. I noticed just now. But yeah, you can't use a subquery inside the aggregate function directly. The between operator cannot be used within a subquery. However, the between operator can be used within the subquery. Okay, so these are the rules we have to follow. And now let's see the syntax, how it looks. Here's a select statement. This select statement out here, up here at the top, is called the outer query. Some people call it a main query, but it's the outer query. Notice here the bracketing, the parentheses. And then inside this orange select statement is what's known as the inner query. It's the subquery. It's called an inner query. This is the outer query. This is a regular subquery. This query is completely independent of the query above it. So if I had another subquery down here and so forth, you can do that, no problem. And each one is independent of the other one above it. So the way it works is this. An inner query always gets executed before the query above it. So here I only have one subquery. So this query gets executed first. These values then get fed up into this query. So this gets executed first. These values get returned up to here. You notice where I have where something in something. So this subquery is in my where clause. So if this returns a bunch of values, I'm looking for the values that are equal to any of these values. That's what the in says, or. Okay, so that's a subquery. Another thing you can do with a subquery, still with a regular subquery, is you can put it in the column list if you want. So the previous one had it in the where condition, where clause. Here it's in this column list. So I can return a column, whatever name from the table 1, but I can also return a value from a different table and display it up here in the column list. Okay? And this is still independent of this query. So that's still a regular query. You can also put it, say, in the from clause. Okay? Whenever you run a select statement, the return set is actually, we can treat that as what they call a derived table or a logical table. So the values that get returned from here, from this table, from this select statement, actually act like a table. So I can select column 1, and column 2, which is the alias for this column. So I take the average of some column in this table, and I'm going to give it an alias called column 2, and I'm going to return that. So I can say select column 1, column 2 from this. But you always have to remember, in a from clause, you expect a table name or a view or something. So this select statement actually has to be given a table name. So you have to use a table alias here. So here's the table alias. So it's called T1. So this is actually like saying select column 1, column 2 from T1, where some condition is met. Okay, so this is just the syntax. So don't forget, whenever you use a subquery in the from clause, you have to give it a table name. You have to give it a table alias, okay? These are all regular subqueries. All these queries are independent of the outer query. They don't use any values from the outer query. We have another type of query called a correlated subquery. That's a subquery that uses values from the outer query. Each subquery is executed once for every row of the outer query, whereas in a regular subquery, the subquery is executed first. Those values are fed up to the query above it. Here, I have to execute a query once for each row in the outer query before I can get my answer for my subquery. So if there's 10 million rows in the query above it, I have to execute those 10 million times, okay, to get what I need. So here's an example of a correlated subquery. Select some column from some table where the column 1 is in this select set, or return set. So, but look at this return set. It says select some column from table 2. This was table 1. Now this is table 2. So far, so good. But look at my where clause. It says where some kind of expression in table 2 equals something in table 1. So now it's got to actually go up here to get some value. So it goes up here to look at the row I'm on currently in this table, does something, and compares it to something in this table. So it's got to keep jumping back and forth for every time, for every row that's up here. So a correlated subquery can actually be very inefficient. If you have lots and lots of rows, it can actually be quite slow. Okay, so now let's see some actual real examples. As always, this is my setup. Here's my tables that I'm going to be using. Here's my notepad so I can create my SQL statements. And here's the command line or console window of my SQL. And I'm going to, from the command line, execute these external script files. So first, let's go into the command line and use the database called grades, I think it was called. Yes. So use grades as a MySQL statement. I've now set the database called grades that's on this server as my default. So now any statements I execute will be automatically executed against this table, or database. Okay. So let's get an example here. Let's make this one fairly easy. Let's find all the students who have taken at least 3 courses. So 3 or more courses, and they could be the same course. Like they could have repeated one course twice and then a different course, or even the same course 3 times. It doesn't matter. Okay, so I just want to see the student's name right now of all the students who have taken at least 3 courses. So we know this table here, if you've been watching the videos, this table here, the student table, just lists all my students. I think there was 1,000 in there. This table is where the table contains the information. If they took a course, they'd be in this table. So this table has student ID, which course they took, which semester they took the course, and what grade they got in the course. So really I want to look in here. So when I do subqueries, I like to break it down into small discrete steps. I think first how I would do it on paper. So basically I'd go to this table and I'd look in it and find all the students, and I would count up all the students who have the same student ID, and if I counted 3 or more, I know they took 3 or more courses. So how then do I put that in a SQL select statement? Well, easy. I type in select, and let's display the student ID, And what do I want to display? I want to display the count. I want to count. Okay, I want to count the student IDs. Where from? Well, from the grade table. Okay, if I just did that, it would just count all the number of rows in this table. That's not what I want to do. What do I want to do when I use an aggregate function? Most likely, I have a group by. And what do I want to group by? I want to group by the student ID. So here what I've done is I'm looking in this table called grade, and I'm grouping all the different student IDs together. So student ID of 1, I'll put in one group. Student ID equal to 2 is in a different group, etc., etc., etc. And then I count each group. So if student ID 1 appears 5 times, I've got a count of 5. If student ID 2 appears once, I get a count of 1 for that student, etc. And you go through. So this actually gives me this. Source is the command I use to execute an external script file in MySQL. If you're using Oracle, use the @ symbol. And what is this called? Try.sql. And I run it, and you can see what comes back. This column here, the first column, is the student ID column right there. And this column is the count column. So a lot of these students took 1 course, 2 courses. Here's someone who took 4 courses. Here's someone who took 3 courses, etc. Here's another 3 courses. So I want those ones, at least 3 courses, 3 or more. So how do I filter this return set now? Well, how do you filter based on other videos that you've been watching? Use the having clause. Having clause is used after the grouping has been done. So I've grouped everything and done my counts, so I have to do the having after the group by. Don't do a where clause before the group by because the grouping hasn't been done yet. So having what? I want to look at the count column, and I want to return all the ones that have a value greater than or equal to 3. So I want to look in this column, which is the count column, and I want to return all the values, all the rows that have a value of 3 or more. So now, did I save that? Yeah. And I run that, and now I got this set. So you can see now they got 3 or more. So now I have all the students who took 3 or more courses. Pretty good. So far so good. Now let's display their names. I want to use this query because now I've filtered this return set. These are the ones I want to return. These students only. These students are the ones I want to return. So what do I want to see? I want to see, let's see, what do I want to see? The student's first name, student F name, and the student last name. We'll call that student, give that a column alias of student. I'm not going to show the count right now. And I'll say from where. Where do I get that from? This table. So from the student table. And if I just did that without this, ignore this. If I just did this, it would just return all the names of every student in here. That's not what I want. I want just these students, these student IDs here from this thing. So I'm going to use this query as my subquery. So subqueries get enclosed in a parentheses. I'm just lining up my parentheses so I make sure I don't miss any. I don't want to have any open brackets, like forget my bracketing or something, because then I'll get an error message. So I want to use this as in my filter, in my where clause. Where what? I want to say where this student ID, where this student ID equals any of these values. So where student ID, and I have to use that multi-valued operator because more than one value is going to come back. I can't say equal because I'm going to get a bunch of values. So this is returning a bunch of values, a bunch of student IDs. So I want to look at that. Now here's one of those rules. Notice up here, remember that rule that said, the second rule that said the number of columns have to match each other? So this here, I'm using one column where student ID is in here. But notice here, I'm returning 2 columns. I'll get an error message. This column count has to match. 1 column here, 2 columns here, I'll get an error. I don't really need the count column to be used. I just want to return this column. So if I return the student ID column, I can feed these values up into here. So this says where the student ID is basically equal to 23 or 30 or 101 or 104 or 105, etc. That's what it's doing. Okay, so let's save that and run that and see what we get. Now we got all their names. Okay, so that's the subquery. This gets executed first, and that will come back with this first column only. I take those values and I feed it up into the outer query, this query. So it says, it's like saying select student first name from student where student ID equals 23, 30, or 30, or 101, or 104, etc. That's what the in operator does. Remember, the multi-valued in operator is synonymous with the Boolean or. It puts ors between all the values. Okay, so far so good. Let's now display the count also. I would like to see these students' names, and I want to see how many courses they actually took. So where can I do that? So I actually want to see the count. I want to see the count in our display. So up here in the column list, I want the count. So I'm going to create a subquery up in the column list now. Select, I'm going to expand this because I'm going to go off the screen, obviously. Select, what do I want to see? I want to see the count, I said. Count of what? Count, where am I getting the count from? I'm getting it from the grade table, where grade dot student ID equals the student ID from the student table. And I will give that a column alias of number of courses taken. That's spelled right. Good. Okay, so now what's happened here is I'm in this subquery right here. I'm looking at a value from the grade table, and at the same time I am looking at a value from the student table. So this is a correlated subquery. Okay, this portion. So I'm looking at the count from the grade table, where the student ID matches the student ID from the student table. Okay, so let's run that. And now I see the people. Now I'm just going to verify this, that it worked. I'm going to pick this one here, Vernie Sidway. He's got 7 courses. I'm going to just double check that. I want to see what his student ID is. I'm going to say select student ID. Actually, let's go up here. Let's go up here. That way I save myself a little work. Student ID is 571, who had 7. So that should be student. Let's pick, let's do concat student fname, comma, student last name from student table, where student ID equals, I can't remember what it was. Let's scroll up. I know some of you are probably yelling at me. You remember what it is. 571 equals 571. Lost my 571. And there it is, Vernay Sidway, which is what I got there. So it's working. So just verify. So there we have a subquery. This is a regular subquery, and this one is a correlated subquery because it's getting values from both. It's doing comparison between the outer query and the inner query. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So no problem there. Now, let's do make it a little more interesting. That was well, obviously if this is the first time you've done it, that's a difficult question. But let's make this a little more interesting, a little more challenging. Okay, let's create a query that can answer this question: which student has the highest mark in each course? List the student name, the course code, and what their mark was. So I only want the students who've got the highest mark in each course. Okay, so student name comes from here, the course code comes from here, and the highest grades come from here. So at some point I'm going to need all three tables in my query. So if you want to try this on your own, you can pause the video and go give it a try. And if you just want to follow along, just follow along, and you might have to go over it a couple of times to get the full understanding of how to do it. Okay? So again, I break my problem up into two pieces. Okay? So let's first get the highest mark in each course. So let's figure out the select statement for that. Select. I'm going to display the course ID. And again, I'm using the grade table to get the highest mark. Course ID from that table, I'm going to use the function called max because I want the highest mark of which column? The final grade percent column. We'll call that final. And we want that from the grade table. And what do we want to do? We obviously want to group by. Group by what? The course ID. So what we want to do, what this statement does, is looks at all the course IDs, puts the same course IDs into one group, and another course ID in another group, another course ID in another group, and then looks for the maximum final grade percent in each group and displays it. So let's run that. And you can see here I have 15 courses, it looks like. And here's the highest marks in each course, 99.3 in course ID 1. And you can test this manually yourself by looking in the tables manually with select statements. But I'm not going to do that right now. Just trust me, it's working. It's a pretty straightforward select statement. Okay, so this one here is the interesting one because I know what data is in here. This 99.3. There's actually 2 students who got 99.3 in this course. So you have to be really careful. This is why I say sometimes you'll have to double check your data. If you can do this query a different way and it doesn't take into account that there could be more than one student that has the same mark and they both have the high mark. So you got to be really careful. Okay, that's the tricky part here. So what I'm going to do is create a virtual table or a derived table now that will list all the student IDs, the course IDs, and the final marks. So let's do that. So let's go select student ID, course ID. I'm going to need to use a table alias, but I don't know what I'm going to call it yet. So I'm gonna fix this in a second. Final grade percent. So those are the things I want to see. Where do I want to see that from? I want to see that from the grade table. I'll call that T1. So now I know this is going to be a T1 because you'll see why in a second. Okay, Now I want to join that with, guess what? This. Okay. I want to join it with this. This is a table. This return set now acts as a table. This is a derived table or logical table. So I want to show the student ID, the course ID, and the final grade from this table that matches these course IDs and has this mark. Okay? So inner join. This is going to be used as my subquery. Okay. I'm just going to move it along here. Because I'm using it as a table, I have to give it a table alias. I need an on condition on t1 dot course ID equal to t2 dot course ID. Okay, but also I need to filter out, I only want to see the ones with the final, also the final grade, T2 final, did I call it final? Yes, T2 final equals final grade percent, final grade percent, T2 final equals final grade percent. Final grade percent is from this table, the grade. So I only want to see where final grade percent is equal to the T2 final grade percent, this 99.3, 99.21. So I filtered on this. Here, let me show you. Let's leave this out for a minute and run that. Okay, so now I have all the students and all the marks for every course. Okay, you can see this is 13, 13. That's the same course, because that's this one right here. That's the course ID, 89.07. This one's 81.1. But I only want the ones that have that matched. I don't know if it's still on the screen. I went too far. That matched too far. These numbers. So I'm going to add back in this. The final percent has to equal this. Okay, so this grade has to equal this grade, which are these numbers. So I'm going to filter and only look for the highest ones. So now let's run it. And lo and behold, it's much shorter here. And let's find the 99 point, was it 99.3? I think it was 99.3. Sorry, I'm going to just scroll up here. Again, you guys probably remember, but I've forgotten. 99.3 in course 1. Go back to the bottom. .3 in course 1. There's course 1 and there's course 1. 99.3 and 99.3. So I got those two. So that worked. And then this guy got 99.12 in course 4, also 99.12 in course 10. If you took all these numbers and went up, back, and you can compare them, that we got them right. So I filtered that. So now this table I want to use. Using this I want to use. Okay? So now I have a virtual table that I can join with this table and this table. Student table and course table is going to be joined with this table. This is what I want now only, which is coming from this query. Okay? So let's work on that. So select, I would like to see the first name and last name, student F name, comma, student last name, we'll call that student. We would like to see the course code, call that course. And we would like to see the final grade %, which is coming from this table right here, this derived table. So course codes from that table, student names from that table, and the final grade % is from this table. Final grade %, we'll just call that highest mark. Yes, okay. And where are we getting that from? Well, we're going to get it from the student table. And we will call that, well, we're already using T1 and T2. Let's call that T3. And we're going to inner join that with this. Let's put it. Now let's make sure we line up our bracketing. Got that. Got that. Got that. Got that. We'll call that table T4 now. Okay, this table is T4. Actually, let's reverse that. Let's call this one T4, and this one is technically T3 because we're going to return that first. Okay, and then what's that joined on? That is joined on, obviously, on T3.studentID equal to T4.studentID. Good job. Now we want to inner join that with the next table, which is called course, which is we'll call T5 we're up to. And what is that joined on? That's joined on, what did I call it? T3.course ID equal to T5.course ID. So the T3 is this table here, which is this table down here. So now I'm joining it on this column right here in that table, which is called T3 right here. Okay, and T5 is this table here. So I'm joining the course ID to course ID. I'm going to set the order by now. I can set the order by of my outer query. Order by T5.course code, I guess we'll do. And we'll also show the order by the name. You don't have to, but I'm going to. And semicolon. Now let's save that and run that. 99.3. This is what I wanted to see. Yes, the two people. 99.3, one person for all these other ones. This was the one. And you can manually go in and look at the grade table to see that these two people got 99.3, and trust me, they do. So there is the query. So in my from clause, I'm using two subqueries here. I have this subquery and then another subquery. Okay? And then I'm just joining all the three tables. So this subquery from here to here creates this table. So I'm using that as my derived table or logical table. And I'm just joining it with this table and this table. And I put the right columns in there so I can join them. I put the student ID and I put the course ID so I can join them together. Okay? And just remember I had to do this extra step, this one, to pick out the people in case one course had more than one person with the same mark and they happen to be the highest mark that I'm looking for. So that's the answer. So a little more challenging, but interesting. That's what I like about the subqueries. Again, go over it and over it until you really understand it. Okay, that's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, subscribe, or comment. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a great day.